Hey, welcome back to episode 56 of the Cellarcast. Made sure to eat before today's episode, and I took a nap, actually. I've noticed I don't like... I feel like I'm too willing to go into the podcast with low energy, or maybe it would be more accurate to say not a lot of gas in the tank. Like, well, if I'm sitting here talking for like 2 hours, I need a little bit of like food in me, so I probably should do things like eat beforehand, which I have done today. And I was feeling really tired. I did that odd thing, I don't have like a set time that I like need to wake up necessarily, but for some reason my body will just wake up like an hour or two earlier than I need to. It just wants to. So I took a nap in the afternoon after some stuff was done, and I feel much better now. So hopefully I'm not gonna burn burn out and crash in the middle of this podcast like I have a few other times. Oh. See, but eating might make me burp like that, so it's the trade-off. It's the trade-off I gotta make. So, no real comments this week or questions left on the last video. So we're just gonna jump straight into the first story because I also didn't really have anything else I wanted to mention off the top of my head in the intro. So let's start with a very amusing story. Now, I feel like the story got pretty popular actually, so you might have heard about it, but I want to excuse me, but I want to cover it anyway because I really liked it. So this one comes from PC Gamer, courtesy of Wes Fenlon. What a great name. Developer turns future of gaming talk into a surprise attack on conventions, NFT, and blockchain sponsors. So, this happened in Brazil, right? Yeah, it was the Brazil International Games Festival. It wasn't independent. I was like, it's big. Their acronym is big, but it's the Brazil International Games Festival. So, this actually struck a little close to home, right? Because when I went to GDC, I was honestly taken aback by just the sheer presence, like the volume of like blockchain companies. It was really off-putting. It felt weird and gross. And when I got the chance to talk to some people who worked in the industry, no one there liked it either. It was very much like people coming in to a space and kind of trying to force their product on you. It felt very, yeah. It was forced, I guess. I generally don't like calling things forced, but it felt very like, ooh, this is not like a natural part of this conference. Like, it doesn't fit the culture of the people who are here, if that makes sense, If you didn't go and listen to that, or you didn't, and never listened to that podcast about the time I went to GDC, I will, I guess, give you some good news and say that most of the people that I talked to who worked in the industry were extremely against like NFTs and stuff. I didn't find anyone who was into it except for people who were like actively there to promote their product. And when I say like no one I met liked it, I mean like from accounts that I heard, like, I won't say which ones, but like pretty big companies like their entire English-speaking branches of their company being actively outspoken against them adding NFTs to their games. like staunch opposition. It really is just people who are it's really just being pushed by people who want to make money and what would you call it, C-suite, executives, I guess board members and stuff like that, who also want to make money for themselves. Because if I go on a rant, I feel like there's not much more I need to say, but in terms of video games, I mean, blockchain technology really, this is kind of an overarching problem with a lot of NFT things. I've heard it described as a solution looking for a problem. And I think that's a pretty interesting, way to describe it. I'll just say way to describe it. Because NFTs don't really add anything to gaming. The people who claim that it's like you can make a tiny little bit of money, maybe. At which point it's like, okay, like everything else in the game usually suffers for it because it has to be built around being like an economy. But pretty much like every online economy, it just gets taken over by groups, like large corporations. I say corporations, but like just large groups of wealthy people who just end up controlling large shares of the market. This happens in like every game with an active economy system. The only difference is that in those games, the economy is not the main focus, or it's EVE Online, where being a part of a big corporation is the appeal of the game. Let's get back on track. Yeah. It really, for people who, like, that I met at GDC, like, people who really care about games as, like, a medium and an art form, the entire pushing of this purely profit-driven kind of agenda, I guess. Like, of course things have to make profit, but, you're talking to people who genuinely, like, they want to have the balance. They want to find the balance of making a profit and creating something that they enjoy. Like, enjoy making and enjoy sharing with people. Like, you can have both. That's like the balance of doing creative stuff, I guess, for a living. Is you have to find things that are marketable enough that you like making that will make you money. That's the you can have both, it's just hard. But anyway. There's this conference in Brazil, festival in Brazil. International Games Festival. Now there's a developer named Mark Venturelli. Dude, I don't know where he's from. I'll say, I think Venturelli. So he was hosting a talk, which was actually, he gave it over video. He was not present because I think he was sick. Did he have COVID? I forget exactly what that was. I read this a couple days ago, but yeah, basically, yeah, he was, I'm pretty sure he was sick with something. Don't remember if it was COVID. But he felt compelled to still get up and give his talk. So there's just, I guess, a lot like GDC. There was a big NFT and blockchain presence at the Brazil International Games Festival, and obviously this was known about. I mean, they'd release. You know who's going to be there months beforehand. So Venturelli was giving a talk that was called "The Future of Game Design." So he starts basically, like, he started off, as if this is kind of like what he's going to talk about, and then he surprises the audience and he says, "Actually, this talk is called why NFTs are a nightmare. And he just launched into this how do I call it? Organized breakdown of everything that's bad about NFTs in the games industry. So, because, yeah, this is honestly giving me a lot of vibes of what was going on at GDC, like a lot of panels, like Web3 and the new generation of games. Like, that's the kind of stuff that would be at GDC, and I was like, ugh. It was like a third of the talk, so I was like, what the fuck? I don't want to see this shit. So PC Gamer did a follow-up interview with him, and he said, some pretty, I don't know, he was kind of spitting. He goes, he basically, the sponsors need to buy their relevance because they're not relevant. These people are outsiders here. They're not important. They're just trying to buy their relevance because they have no actual influence over the future of our industry. If you just give them this space uncontested, you're just giving them exactly what they want and buying their narrative that they're relevant. So kind of what he means by that is like, you know, number one. So there's two. I don't think he's coming out against the event, because he says for hosting them, but he says if you give them this space uncontested. So he actually goes on to say that basically, like, yeah, you can boycott these kind of trends and stuff, but all that is actually doing is meaning that there's no one around in the room to criticize them. So, like, they're going to buy their way in. Like, it was already decided, you know? And if you're just going to leave, it's like, okay, well, you're kind of just taking a rain check and not really doing anything. But he felt compelled. And, you know, I mean, if you're, like, just a conference goer, right? Or a convention goer, like, you can choose whether or not. Like, he was someone who actually had the ability to publicly kind of, like, make a statement about it. And he did it in this very ballsy way. So, his point more so was that if he had just said nothing, it would have just, you know, there would have been, people wouldn't have interacted with it, but it would have made it more normal. And that's kind of like the dangerous part, is that you're, by refusing to actually criticize it and just kind of staying out of the conversation, you're actually, you're kind of giving it an opportunity to become normal and to get people used to seeing it. And even if they don't like it, it's like, well, you know, you'll kind of begrudgingly accept it. Let's see. So, let's see. Let's see. Oh yeah, so there's a recording of it on YouTube, and there's an English version. I think he attaches an English version of the slides because it's originally in Portuguese. So the really funny thing about this, which is that the organizers knew about this. Because obviously, like, they're getting money from these blockchain companies. So you might think, like, hey, are they going to, it's understandable. Oops, my fucking earbuds fell out. I'm like, I'm not listening to anything. Why don't I just take my earbuds out? They fell off my desk. Right. It's understandable to assume that, like, maybe the organizers would have a little bit of a problem with that. So he made sure to clear it with them beforehand, like, hey, I'm going to do this kind of bait and switch thing, openly, harshly criticizing these people who are sponsoring your conference. And they were like, sure. They had no problem with it. Controversial as his talk was clearly going to be, the big organizers made no moves to censor the talk or prevent him from having his say, although that doesn't mean it was popular with some of Big's Web3 sponsors. Big had not yet provided an official statement on the talk as of press time, though PC Gamer was told one will be provided on Monday. Did they? Did they actually do that? Hang on. Brazil International. There we go. International Games Festival. Do they have the, they have a Twitter or something? Is there an update on this story? I'm not sure. But supposedly, I guess they said that they... Anyway, let's move on. I've heard that... So, Venturelli says, I've heard that the sponsors got really mad. They tried to break into the talk while I was talking, but the organization would not let them. That doesn't surprise me because the organization, not at a single point did they censor me. Did they stop me from putting what I wanted on the slides? I gave them access to the slides before the talk. There was never any kind of intention on their side to shut me up or anything like that. Yeah, so, let's see. So it goes into some more details about kind of the, I don't know, some of his criticisms. Specifically bringing up the Ubisoft NFT thing. So he says, this is such a naive proposition. So basically, they were talking about, remember when Ubisoft was trying to introduce their stupid NFTs into, what was it, Ghost Recon Breakpoint? Sure. So when it got criticized, Nicolas Poirard, VP of Ubisoft's Strategic Innovations Lab, defended it, saying the end game is about giving players the opportunity to resell their items once they're finished with them, or they're finished playing the game itself. So you buy these items for money, and then you resell them. Oh, isn't that great? He says, Venturelli says, this is such a naive proposition. The expectation versus reality here is so bizarrely far apart, because what's actually going to happen is that organized groups are going to operate and scale with ever-diminishing margins and just push out everybody else, because that's what happens. If you play EVE Online or RuneScape or any other game that simulates economy, that's what happens. Organized groups are going to fucking crush you. What actually is going to happen is that if you just naively play a game and have fun, imagine that, then you want to sell your stuff is not going to be worth anything. It's going to be worth fractions of a cent. But what you give in return for that fraction of a cent is that you're completely powerless now. Your fantasy, your ability to be impactful in the world as an individual is gone, because now it is controlled by these guys. And what he means by that is basically, I'm extrapolating a little bit, but what I'm assuming he means, makes sense to me, is the people with the most influence who are going to be controlling, who are going to have the easiest time doing things in these games, are going to be the people with the most resources. People with the most resources are going to be in these, as he calls them, organized groups, who basically push everyone out. Your ability to just kind of do your own thing in any kind of multiplayer game is going to be eradicated, basically. You're going to be kind of forced to join into one of these groups, and it's like, do you want to do that? Is that why you want to play a game, just so that you can, like, I don't know, do a raid or something? Do you want to, like, have to participate in this whole big economy? Maybe you could get one or two games that are capitalizing on that appeal, but it's so limited. And again, EVE already exists, and it does it without real money implications. Or it's just completely useless, like in a fucking shooter where it's like, great, I can resell it for, yeah, as he says, a fraction of a cent. Great. Okay then. What did that get me? A fraction. Can I... Do I have to pay taxes on that? Like, what do I... and here's an interesting thing that I think is that he brings up that I think is cuts a little deeper if we're going to go beyond video games. So he says so basically they're kind of getting at this idea that decentralized things like blockchain exist because there is an inherent lack of trust in other people. Because why, if you trust people, if you trust others, what need is there for you to have a how would you call it? What's the problem of just having things be centralized or part of a central group? You could argue for things like maybe vulnerability, but if there's like multiple parties in that centralized group, then it probably makes it less vulnerable. So if you don't, the reason that you would go into decentralized something like decentralized finance is because you don't trust places like banks. And the ironic thing now is that a lot of these decentralized finance companies are just basically just like banks, except it's independent and they have like very little regulations. So it's the same thing but worse, because like your money isn't even insured. So if they get hacked and they lose like all of their liquidity, I don't know what their term is. If they lose all their crypto because of a security flaw, which has happened several times, then you lose all of your money and you can't get it back. You get no reimbursement. The company doesn't even get reimbursement. Like the banks get bailed out. It's just, why? So he says, computationally, like in real life, if you don't trust the people that you're working with, you have to spend a lot more energy to achieve the same things. If I'm living with you in the same house and we don't trust each other, I have to, every time before I leave my house, hide my valuables. I have to make inventory of the things that I own and maybe put cameras or locks inside of things. When I come back home, I need to check everything and see if you messed with any of my stuff and make sure that you don't get into my room when I'm sleeping and all that shit. It's so much energy that I have to use just to exist in a room with you because I don't trust you. That, I feel, is a very good metaphor about how computationally blockchain works, and what is the underlying philosophical idea behind it, which is we want a world without any sort of centralized authority because we cannot trust any of them ever. And that is the opposite of what we want as a society, in my opinion. I think it's a really interesting argument, right? I think it's a really interesting argument. I don't want to get like too crazy on this podcast, but there's like a lack of trust in institutions is something that I think has become a lot more pervasive, even, in the mainstream. I think that there's a lot of and like the thing is that it's like not unfounded, right? It's not like a conspiracy theory. It's like, no, the government like does listen to your phone calls and stuff like that. And the TSA was only supposed to exist for like 5 years, and they're still here and stuff like that. And I'm mainly speaking from like an American point of view, a United States of American point of view. U.S. Americans. I'm a U.S. American. What the fuck was I talking to say? I got sidetracked thinking of that fucking video of that girl who was on like Miss Teen USA. What the fuck? Which one is that? Hang on. Miss Teen USA. Yes, so Miss Teen USA 2007 South Carolina answers a question. I love that fucking video. Such as, and the Iraq. Oh, I love that video. What was I gonna say? What the fuck was I gonna say? I think there's a lot less, like, yeah, there's been a significant downturn in the amount of trust that we have in our institutions, from government to banks to, like, I don't know, the judicial system and law enforcement. Living in America is a very alienating thing, because it's so big and it's such a large machine. We were talking about this on the live episode, but it because it's so complex, and there's so many levels that our society needs to function. Being so large, you end up feeling very, like, disconnected from a lot of things, on top of just like natural disconnects that happen via like geography or social class. It's like, well, it's like when that fuck, I hate talking about current modern day politics, but like, I remember when the Roe v. Wade thing happened. It's like, well, why did that happen? It's like, well, fucking where do I even start with that? It's like, why did that happen? It's like, well, we have this Supreme Court, and they decide on things with people's rights, and they decided that the Roe v. Wade decision was not constitutional, because it's the interpretation of the justices, and the justices might have a stricter or looser interpretation of the Constitution based on their political leaning. So there's like this metagame where whoever's the president at the time when a justice retires or dies is going to put in a justice that is their political leaning. So Ruth Bader Ginsburg stayed on for longer than she should have if they wanted another like left-leaning justice. So then she died while Trump was in office, and then he put in another right-leaning justice, and you start like listening to this, and you're like, this is so far away from my life. This is so disconnected and meaningless garbage from like my day-to-day existence. But there's plenty of people. This whole process can have huge ramifications on people's day-to-day lives. Right? Like, this is crazy. Why is it like this? This is so dumb. There's so many layers and layers and layers, to the point where I don't think it's possible for people who are important enough to actually like care about most people. Like, you can't care about everyone. I used to go through this thing where I would see sad news stories and I'd feel sad, and I don't even feel sad anymore for the most part, because it's like I can't cry about everything, or I'd just be crying all day. Like, you can only care about so much stuff. I need energy to make YouTube videos where I talk about DOS porn games, you know? I need to like eat. I can't just lay in my bed all day and be upset. Like, it doesn't help me at all to be upset about things all the time. What am I talking about? It's so hard. It's impossible to care. The world is so large and so interconnected that it's, in a weird way, we have to force ourselves to be less connected, or we just cease to function because it's overwhelming. So like, you just end up kind of like not even like normal people. Like, at a certain level, you're like, fuck, like, Someone just got their cancer diagnosis. Someone was just diagnosed with cancer right now. I don't know who, but someone has. Fuck, I can't care about that. And imagine that you're like the leader of a country, or like a legislator or a senator. One state in the United States might have more people than like several countries in Europe or something like that. Or they might not. It could be like Wyoming, where there's more where there's more corn than people. Or was it cows than people? I forget. Like, can you care about all of them? No, it's impossible. You'd go insane. So, like, you don't. And all these weird, arbitrary, unreal systems just get, like, built up, and they're just your own little world. But it, like, has these weird ramifications because of the way that the country's set up. It's bizarre and alienating. So what I'm saying is, I feel like it would be better if society was smaller. I feel like that would be better in general. And also, NFTs are kind of dumb. But yeah, I generally agree with what he's saying. I have no idea how you would increase the overall level of trust in institutions. I don't know, because they're too large. Unless we went through some like kind of cataclysmic event where we had to like forcibly restart as like a forced, like, you know, balanced teams, vote yes or no. To just break down into smaller institutions that apply to smaller amounts of the population, so that you could actually feel like things are meaningful. Is there anything else funny in this? Yeah, so he goes on to say, if we boycott it and we don't go to it, we're conceding defeat, pretty much. This is what I was talking about earlier. Oh yeah, he did have COVID. And he still gave this talk. What a Chad. So if we boycott it and we don't go to it, we're conceding defeat, pretty much. We're just saying we forfeit. We cannot do this. We need to do the opposite. In fact, I do not think that the event is pro-crypto or pro-NFT. I know them personally. I serve as an advisor on the board of Abra Games, which is the Association of Brazilian Game Developers Companies. My opinion against crypto and NFT is not the majority at Abra Games, but it's important that I represent this opinion over there. In the same way, it's important that we go and we take up the space that is offered to us, not only to me, but to many people in the indie scene in Brazil. I was on the side of, hey, let's contest this, let's use this space, let's voice our opinion against it. Otherwise, the blockchain companies are going to be monologuing over there. That was largely the case with Big's sponsored talks. Quote, they were spouting their shit basically on the main stage, just saying, hey, crypto games are super cool, they're going to be awesome. Just people don't understand, or the previous generation of crypto games gave it a bad reputation, but a new generation that's coming up is going to be awesome. By contesting the space, Venturelli and everyone else who publicly speak out about NFTs and the boilerplate blockchain hype that has muscled its way into gaming spaces turns that monologue into a dialogue. I never realized that dialogue is two people. Monologue and die. Die and mono and die. I never realized that. Yeah, it's just the Latin root for two, because it's a conversation between... It's talking between two people, and monologue is one person. Wow, you learn something every day. And Venturelli doesn't think that upsetting a few of the show's sponsors will hurt it in the end. Quote, I don't feel like I have hurt Big by talking shit about NFTs, because Big does not need these guys. It's the other way around. The article, the writer says, investors see potential value in South America right now due to exploitable political and economic instabilities, which for Venturelli means that presenting his counter-argument is more important than ever. that's interesting because down in the Philippines and I think a few other countries, but mainly the Philippines, that game Axie Infinity was really big. It was like a shitty Pokemon ripoff, but Pokemons were NFTs. And the idea was they were really pushing into marketing in that market because there's a lot of poor people in the Philippines, to be honest. And it's like, hey, you can download this app and you can like maybe make money. And it ended up, I mean, there's if you want to find out about the scam that Axie Infinity was, because it was a total pyramid scheme. There's much better videos on that, but basically the way that it would work is like, one of the reasons that these things are pyramid schemes, maybe not like exactly, I don't know if they exactly fit the model, but basically, in order for money to keep flowing, it's like, okay, people are making money off of this, right? Well, where does that money come from? Because obviously, you know, the developers need to upkeep the game. They got to keep up servers. They got to add content. They got to pay people. They got to do marketing. So the developers need to make money, and also players need to make money, or at least have the opportunity to make money. It's like the main draw of your game. So like, where does that money come from? Like, if a player is making a net profit, right? If you imagine, if you think about it like this, every game that has like extra microtransactions or DLC or something like that, you are technically making like a net loss on that, right? Because you're just paying for a skin or a game or a DLC pack or whatever, and you're not making anything back on it. Like, yeah, because it's just an expense that you're doing for entertainment, but the idea here is that you can make money back. So ideally, no one's going to play your game if they can't make a, you know, positive money, you know? If they can't make back more than they spend. So if you have like 100 players, more money, the way everyone wants to play the game, more money has to be flowing out than flowing in, right? Because like, how is the money coming in? Well, the money comes in from new people joining, because the only way that they could figure out how to make this whole system work is to have basically an upfront cost of something in the ballpark of like $300, something like that, to get you basically like your starter pack, right? So it relies on bringing new people in to basically stimulate the economy, which is not sustainable. It's not a sustainable model, which is, you know, pyramid schemes are not sustainable models, because eventually, like, they generally cap out. And then they, you know, by that time, the people at the top have already dipped and taken their money and just left everyone with a bunch of useless shit that they spent hundreds of or thousands or however much on. That's pretty much Axie Infinity's business model. There is no way to keep money going in unless new people join and pay for these like starter packs. There's no other way. Because NFTs are just in made up value, more so than money is already made up value. Has literally no basis other than we believe it has basis. Please keep downloading our game so our proprietary crypto has some kind of a value. Axie Infinity was also coincidentally one of those games that got hacked by us like via a security breach, and a bunch of people lost like all of their money. So that worked out really well. And there was this weird system in Axie that I remember hearing about where basically if you couldn't, because again, they were marketing in like countries where people don't have a lot of money to spend. You know, if your main income is going to be Axie Infinity, you're pretty desperate, probably. So you might not always have the $300 to put down to get your starter pack. Like, that's a reality for a lot of people. So, like, what's the solution here? Oh, we'll make this thing called scholarships. So someone who has several Axies, which you need to play the game to make the money, your little Pokemons, your Axies are, you can, like, basically rent them to other people for like, you know, a reduced cost. And then they can make some money off of that. So they'll like make their money, but they then have to give a percentage to the person who is like, who rented it out to them. That's the agreement, is you rent it out to someone and then they give you a cut of what they make. And then the person who has a scholarship, is like renting an Axie, can then also give scholarships to other people. Again, where they're making a cut of what those people are going to make. So the money is just it's kind of going up and up and up the levels of the scholarship system, and getting slightly, every level you go down, the amount of money that person is making is slightly less and slightly less and slightly less until it eventually gets up to the top, or to get to the top where they're making the most cut, I'm assuming. So like, yeah, big fuck. So like they're advertising in these low income countries that have economic problems, political problems, where the job market is not very stable, where there's a lot of just facts of life that people have to deal with that are going to cost money. And they're basically like exploiting those areas and kind of like doing what a lot of scams in the internet, or just scams in general, do. But they're selling people a dream. They're selling people a dream that you can wear your way out of poverty, wear your means of upward mobility. When really it's just a big rat race. And I remember reading a comment on a video talking about, I think, Axie or one of these things. We good? Are we good? Okay, I think we're good. Alright, my microphone got unplugged for 1 second. It's good, I don't think we lost anything. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I remember reading a comment on one of these videos, and it mentioned that, okay, the cable fell out again. Okay. I think we're good now. But I read a comment on a video, and it mentioned, someone who lived, I think, in the Philippines. And they said, they described, this is so sad. They described, like, knowing people who had tried to make, Axie their income, like their main income. And God, this sounds so sad. The shame they felt, or the shame they could see in their eyes when they said they had to go do their daily tasks. Like your daily fucking mobile game tasks that you gotta do to like get your daily rewards. Except it's your job. It's so... God, I feel so bad even, like, thinking about it. Dude, imagine, like... There's news stories about this. These are not just, like, young people. I saw stories, like a couple who was in their 50s or 60s. I think that was, like, might have even been, like, something that Axie was advertising. Like, look, we gave this older couple who was struggling financially a source of income with our amazing blockchain game. And I'm just imagining, like, someone who's grown up their entire life doing, like, honest work or whatever. And just, like, they gotta play a fucking trash mobile game. They're like, I need to do my daily missions. Jesus. It's so depressing. Let's see. Just to finish off the article and the story. Venturelli continues, if we don't take up some spaces and we let these kinds of people take these spaces, Suddenly, they're dictating what's the future. Suddenly, they're taking the investment so that they are building our next big projects. That's when it starts to get really dangerous, because it can jeopardize our future as an industry, in my opinion. Because I don't feel like these things have long legs. I feel like they might be successful in the short term, but they're going to fall on the long term for sure. Venturelli did eventually bring his talk back to the future of game design, adding that he'd fooled everyone again. He wasn't there just to rag on Web3. Venturelli's indie studio Rogue Snail is working on a looter shooter called Relic Hunter's Legend that's putting into practice some of his ideals, attempting to build trust and community between players with quote-unquote more human free-to-play monetization, and a looking for group system built around helping others. Quote, right now we are living in a crisis of trust in Western society. Trust in each other, in institutions, and even in our future together is in decline. We should be building systems that help connect people and build trust, build sustainable solutions, and build infinitely scalable human solutions. We should not be shifting away from culture, entertainment, and storytelling towards economic activity. We should not just be eliminating the final hiding places that we have to run away from the oppression of capitalist society. Yeah, I don't know. Man's kind of spitting. Honestly, it reminds me of, again, people were asking me about Death Stranding. Sounds kind of like what Kojima was talking about. Maybe in 30 years, when we're when we really hit the big time in the trust deficit of our society, maybe Death Stranding will be like Metal Gear Solid 2. Maybe Kojima just really has that third eye, and he can see all the future problems of society. I kind of believe it. Hey, speaking of actually, no, I want to do a fun story. I want to do a fun story before we go into another story. So, Bayonetta 3 news, and this is pretty short. So, Platinum announced the release date for Bayonetta 3. It's October 28th, and there's a new trailer for it. And they said they would put out a follow-up tweet saying, "Relax, the witch is back and sexier than ever." We've added the revolutionary naive angel mode to Bayonetta 3 so more people can fully enjoy it. By turning it on, you can play right in the living room without having to worry about what's on screen. We think. So they have a little video showing off this new, basically, I don't know, parental controls mode. I don't know what you'd call it. The safe for work mode. So basically, it just means that Bayonetta is always in her full outfit. You don't get the clothes removal effects, so to speak, from that you would usually get. The attacks are still there, but it's all safe for mom and dad, probably. So they have a little side by side. It looks like the RTX off and on kind of like thing, but no, it's just. I think it's one of the sections where you've got the big kaiju battles going on. So Bayonetta's kind of just posed up with all the kind of like hair swirls around her, and with it off, she's like totally naked, but conveniently covered up by the swirls around her. When I put it on, fully clothed, baby, fully clothed. There's another one where there's like one of her transformations, where it just covers up some of the cleavage, just enough. It's one where she turns into a big butterfly or moth or what? I guess it would be a butterfly because it's Bayonetta. Holy shit, the bitrate tanks on this video. So, yeah, that's funny. I don't know. I think it's fair. Hey, anything so I can play this game in front of my parents. I'm not gonna play this game in front of my parents. I barely even see my parents. That was kind of a joke. Anyway, yeah, so it's there. I like how they call it naive angel mode. It's kind of a fun little... It's a cute little tongue-in-cheek way to put that in there. There will be more people who get to play Bayonetta for that reason, so that should be good. And they can just turn it off. They can just turn it off when their parents aren't home. They can... What? Okay. Remember how we talked last time about potential legislation for loot boxes? Well, hot off the presses from today, actually, July 17th when I record this, the UK government says the games industry must act on loot boxes or face legislation. A working group will be formed to develop industry-led measures to protect players. This was courtesy of Video Games Chronicle, posted by Jordan Midler, sorry. So this is kind of a follow-up to, it was last week, right? Yeah. Last week's stories about other European countries who are looking to legislate this stuff. So the UK government has said that the games industry must do more to protect vulnerable players from loot boxes, and that it will, quote, not hesitate to consider legislation if companies do not bring in sufficient measures to keep players safe. Gotta slow down. Yeah, I mean, obviously they can't say will not hesitate to legislate it, because, like, that's not how the government works. They have to consider it, but, you know, something tells me it would probably get through. It seems like something that... I don't know if this would happen in America, because of, like... America's got crazy-ass lobbyists, dude. Also, Bobby Kotick donates to a bunch of fucking politicians. Remember when there were laws against how much people could donate to politicians, and then it got repealed because of no real reason? Just, yeah, it would be fun to repeal it, you know? That was a fun time. That led to a lot of really healthy developments in American politics. But we're talking about the UK. A 2020 call for evidence on loot boxes, launched by the UK's Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, found that players who purchased loot boxes may be more likely to experience, quote, gambling, mental health, financial, and problem gaming-related harms. The risk may also be higher for children and young people, it was found. So naturally, you know, nothing hard confirmed. This was one study done by one institution. But they did find some evidence to suggest, I guess, that children and younger people are at a higher risk for these things, which... I don't know exactly like what goes into that. It might just be that they're more used to growing up with these sorts of things, but... Yeah, it's funny because... What's really funny is that I have like a weird perspective on it, because I feel like I am in the age group just before this stuff became commonplace. Like, just before. Like, I still remember growing up when this was a relatively new thing, when it was like, oh, Overwatch is doing it now. Overwatch was a game that came out when I was in middle school. You know, I'd already had plenty of experience with, like, other games that didn't use these kinds of models. I guess, you know, CSGO kind of kickstarted it, but it took a while for it to catch on. So it was kind of like a CSGO specific thing. Maybe there's other examples of companies being influenced by that. But really it was like CSGO was the big one for a while that did loot boxes, if my memory serves correctly. And then Overwatch kind of was like, we'll do that too. And then it spread and spread and spread. So, like... Ooh, brain hitting a wall. See if we can chip through it. I feel like if you're in the age group, like, a few years younger than me, a lot of the games you grew up with will actually people who've grown up in the post-loot box age where it was commonplace. So I have like a weird perspective where I'm like, well, I feel like I can approach that. I feel like I can approach a game with loot boxes. What would you call it? Responsibly. I'm also just very averse to like gambling with stuff. Like, if I lose a little bit, I've never done like I've never done actual like Vegas type gambling or anything like that. What's the legal age for gambling? Is it 18 or 21? I actually forget. Legal age of gambling. I'm sure it's different by state. Gambling. Because they don't serve alcohol. 18. Oh, lottery is like 18. Let's see. Casinos and slot machines. 18. California says 18 and 21. That might be whether or not it serves alcohol. 21. 18/21. 21. 18. It's illegal in Georgia. It's legal in Georgia. Huh. In Hawaii. Right. If you go back and watch my Sega and the actual Yakuza video, you might remember that... actually, I don't know if this has any correlation, but one of the things that caused Sega to go to Japan in the first place was that they got forced out of the American market because they were mostly serving on U.S. Air Force bases and naval bases. That was a big part of their market, specifically in Hawaii, where I believe the company was founded. Yeah, it was founded in Hawaii, I'm pretty sure. And then there was like a law, it was like you couldn't... I think it was like... There was some kind of gambling law where you couldn't import gambling machines you couldn't move them between states. So I think they had this weird... Like, the laws were different for U.S. military bases, because their main thing was military bases and not, like, the state as a whole. Not like the island state of Hawaii as a whole. Was Hawaii a state at that time? I think it was. Or was it? I forget. So it was back in the 60s. Wasn't it? Where, the 50s? It was post-World War II. Started in World War II. This was in the 50s. Might have been a state by then. I don't remember. But, so they were like, fuck, we can't move. It's literally illegal. I think they could get past it because they were only serving on bases, on like military bases. And then there was this law that's like, you cannot transport gambling machines to states where gambling is illegal, including military bases on those states. So they were like, fuck. And they went to Japan because there was a convenient loophole where it's like, well, it only applies for like United States like municipalities, so overseas bases just fine. So that's why they went to Japan at the something air base. I forget which one. It's like a big airport now, I think. Anyway, what the fuck are they talking about? Why does Michigan say 18 with a question mark? Yeah, it looks like in most places it's either 18, 21. I guess no one knows what the North Carolina age for gambling is. Interesting. Let's see. It also might be different depending on whether or not it's on Native American land. That might also be a reason. Might also be a reason for that. For some of the multiple ages given. Anyway. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, kids gambling, right? I've never done me gambling. I've never done actual gambling, but I've participated. I've done like little systems in games that are like basically, simulated gambling with like in-game currency or something like that. They just have like a slot machine. Every time I lose, I'm like, even if it's the slightest amount, I'm like, I'm never doing that again. I'm so risk averse. It's one of the reasons I don't invest. Also, I'm not aware enough of the stock market to invest. And I don't have enough money to invest. On Sunday, the government called for the purchase of loot boxes to be made unavailable to children and young people unless they are approved by a parent or guardian. Quote, we want to stop children going on spending sprees online without parental consent, spurred on by in-game purchases like loot boxes. Games companies and platforms need to do more to ensure that controls and age restrictions are applied so that players are protected from the risk of gambling harms. Children should be free to enjoy gaming safely whilst giving parents and guardians the peace of mind they need. Like, yeah, I mean, there is like an element of like, well, maybe don't give your kid your credit card. They could just steal it. Now that I think of it, they could just, there's a lot of ways, especially if it's like a mobile game or something, and it's like on your mom's iPad or something, and it's like, well, her credit card's already connected to the Apple ID, so you can just kind of, I definitely never did that on my mom's iPad. Never did that. I never did that one time. I'm kidding, I did. But it wasn't to buy in-game purchases for mobile games. It was to buy Mega Man comics. Which is funny considering my last video and my next video. But there was like an app where you could read. There was an official like app for the Mega Man Archie comic. And, every issue was like $2 or something. And I was like, well, Mom, I'm gonna slowly. I was so fucking devious, dude. I was so devious. I would spend like $2, and then she'd get like the receipt email. I was like, oh no, she's got a receipt, and then I would just delete the email. I'm such a fucking little devil, so I could read my Archie Mega Man comics, and then every month when the new one came out, I'd do it again. Oh, that book is so good. You should go read that. Seriously, you should go read the Archie Mega Man comic. It's great. So yeah, maybe you could just be like me, but instead of buying Mega Man comics, you buy like loot boxes for a shitty mobile game. I do find it interesting that they mention that younger people might be more vulnerable to these types of things, likely to experience gambling, mental health, financial, and problem gaming related harms. Which, it's up in the air whether or not it develops. These kinds of things develop those things like something like a gambling gambling addiction, or if it just exploits people or is appealing to people who are already have it or are kind of predisposed to it. Like, there's a thing about, like, video games don't make people violent unless you're like severely mentally ill, in which case, you shouldn't be exposed to any kind of violent media. Violent games or violent media in general, likely most of the research kind of points to it either having no correlation at all, or sometimes even being like a pressure release for that kind of thing. But people who are violent would be more likely to be drawn to violent media. Like, you're just naturally, it's not a chicken and the egg, but it's one before the violent person goes to the violence. The violence doesn't come into the person to make them the violent person. You get what I'm talking about. I'd be curious whether or not, because there's been a decent amount of studies about the relationship between, violence, like violence and violent media. I'm curious if it applies to things like addiction, because, there's like general gaming addiction, right? Which is a thing. It's totally a thing, right? Just like you can be addicted to anything. The thing that makes gaming addiction a little different, I'm talking about video game addiction specifically, is there's like, yeah, you can be addicted to like exercise, right? But there isn't like a person whose job it is to make you more likely to get addicted to exercise. which like game companies do, you know? They literally have people who are like behavioral specialists who try to engineer systems to make their audience members compelled to return to the game and maybe make more purchases and all that. Which makes it kind of like a unique kind of hurdle. If you listen to Dr. K from Healthy Gamer GG, he talks about this fairly frequently, about like this is just a new challenge for parents to overcome that a lot of parents really aren't prepared for and stuff like that. It's pretty interesting. Yeah, we're going to find out more about that in the coming years and decades. Let's see, any more news stories? Not really. Kind of want to devote the last portion of this to talking a little bit about some games. So, my obligatory shill for Vampire Survivors. I gotta stretch. If you have not played Vampire Survivors already, what are you doing? It's $3 on Steam. Sometimes it even goes on sale, excuse me. Sometimes it even goes on sale for like $1.50. It's mad cheap, and it's really fun, and there's a ridiculous amount of content to unlock. It's how many hours do I have in the good old VServe? I have 113.1 hours. I have 113.1 hours in a game that I paid. I think I actually got this when it was on sale, because that's when I was interested in it. I got this for literally like under $2. Legit, like, go fucking check it out. It's so good. It's the only game on Steam that I have 100% completed. I have 100% achievements. And that's not because I'm like a crazy achievement hunter completionist. It's because you basically start out with a small number of things and, you know, characters, items, stages, stuff like that unlocked. And then playing the game, you will unlock those things by, you know, fulfilling certain requirements, completing challenges and stuff like that. And each unlock is an achievement. So every time a new update comes out, I just get the new achievements, unlock the new characters, find the new items, play the new stages and stuff like that. It's such a good time. Such a good time. So yeah, and it's only early access, but it's getting very close to being a full game very soon. I think they put out a roadmap, and every 2 or 3 weeks, the game gets a new update that adds a bunch of new stuff. It's going to be a little sad when it's done, you know, but it's been a great ride, and it's definitely a game that I can come back to. And there might even be, you know, post-launch development support. I could totally see that. I mean, well, actually, the dev said what he wanted to do was, he said something about, it's because, by the way, it's also made by like one guy. There's like one guy who does the program. I think it's like one guy who does programming and graphics, and then I think one musician. The dev's name is Poncol or something, an Italian guy actually. And he said that the game, there was some like big, I'm trying to remember exactly like what the announcement, what, like he said specifically, basically he made an announcement that the game's kind of base, like code base was a little jank and hard to work with. And oh no, there was like certain things with the way that he programmed it, like on the basic level, that caused some stuff like slow down and stuff when the game gets really crazy. Now, it's a very like low, how would I say? Generally, Vampire Survivors is a pretty like low-end system game. Like you don't need a lot, like no fancy graphics or anything like that. But if there's a ton of stuff going on, like a ton of enemies, ton of projectiles and stuff, you can sometimes get slowdown, even with a system that should totally be able to run it. And he said, I think he just said that was a consequence of the way that he built the game initially. And so he wants to basically recode the entire thing in like a new engine, or just basically from the ground up. I don't remember if he said that was going to be like a full like new game or something like that. It would be nice. He's been super player friendly this whole ride, which is something that's really nice. It would be cool if all that stuff was just like you could just get it if you already own the game. That would be cool. So like when I say that he's a very player friendly character, wait, I just saw this. I'm looking for like the thing where he made this announcement. When I wrote the name Poncle for the first time some 10 years ago, I went for a lowercase p because I had this pretentious thought of this would serve as a reminder to stay small and humble no matter what. 10 years ago, man. And oh my, with things being so crazy with VS, that actually turned out to be a very good reminder to have. We had a team for some time now. I didn't even know about that. But I'm taking the opportunity to talk about it only now that one more developer, David, is finally joining me and working full-time on the current version of the game. This doesn't mean we're going to reach version 1.0 of the game faster than expected, but it means we'll be putting the game even more features and be faster in polishing rough edges. Neat. If you're following this kind of longer update posts, then you already know. So yeah, so they have some freelancers, yada yada. We're busy rewriting the entire physics system so that it feels arcadey rather than realistic. I don't know exactly what that means. Oh, he says, let's see, wait. Let me go back and read this paragraph I kind of skipped over. Initially, we thought about remaking the game using features from the new engine. Right, because working on a full-time engine port. Full-time on the engine port. We thought about remaking the game using features from the new engine, but the resulting game, even if better optimized, didn't really feel Vampire Survivors enough. For starters, the physics were too accurate and realistic. Enemies weren't even able to push one another inside walls. Or the fonts were just too crisp and easy to read. That was not acceptable. So we're now busy rewriting the entire physics system so that it feels arcadey rather than realistic, and tweaking a lot of aspects of the main gameplay loop so that in the end, ideally we'll have a version of Vampire Survivors that plays just like the current one, but that is free of hardware and controller compatibility issues, and that performs well even when there is an unreasonable amount of projectiles and enemies on screen. We're still planning to release the new version this summer, but in reality, it'll be ready when it's ready. We won't be rushing for an arbitrary release date, and we'll take all the time it requires to be done right. Let's see. To sum it up, we might be getting close to the conclusion of Vampire Survivors, but for Poncle, that's just the beginning. Great. So that kind of promises to me that once they finish with the engine port and they get the full 1.0 version, that I could see them definitely adding on more stuff. I mean, it's such an easy system to just keep adding stuff to. You know, more items, more characters, more stages, fun stuff like that. Fun little unlockables. When I say that he's like, they're really like player first, is there's so many just like quality of life things that are like, yeah, thank you for adding that. Like, okay, for instance, what they realized is that a lot of players, so there's kind of like a roguelite element to this game, and kind of games in this style that have taken after it, where you collect. So within like stages, you'll collect coins, and then those coins can be spent outside of the stage to like basically give you like things like permanent upgrades, and then that'll like, you know, over time make you stronger and stronger and make the game a little easier. Well, there's only so many upgrades, like tiers that you can get. Like, you can only upgrade your strength like 5 times. So they were getting this kind of feedback that some players who had played a lot of the game had basically maxed out on things to do. They'd beaten every stage. Excuse me. They had gotten every character, every item, every weapon, all the evolutions, all the collectibles, and gotten all the upgrades, and they didn't really have anything to do with their gold. They were earning all this gold, and they just didn't... It kind of became useless after they were done, like, spending it. So they added an update with... there's like an item, and then once you collect the item, it basically adds a character to every stage called the Merchant. So the Merchant is like right around like in the center of the map where you spawn, and you can basically go... The Merchant is like a place to dump your gold, basically. So there's... Most of the items are in the game, you can... Most of the weapons you can... Like any character can use, but there's a select couple characters who have weapons that are sort of unique to them. So you can buy those weapons from the Merchant for gold, which is neat. And then there is a mechanic called... There's an item called golden eggs. And golden eggs give permanent... They're super expensive. They're like 9,000 gold or something like that. And they give you a permanent... A very small, very minute, but permanent upgrade to one of your current character's stats. And then there was a... there's like some new enemies that they added in for some like optional items. They're like show up. They'll spawn when you go to like... They kind of like guard those items. And then if you kill them, they have a ton of health. And if you kill them, they drop an egg. So... Golden eggs were basically meant to be a gold dump for players to now have like infinite growth potentially for their characters, but very small. It would, you'd have to build it up over time, and it's also a random stat that it upgrades. Well, then they got some feedback that players didn't like the infinite growth thing because they felt that it made the game a little too easy. So they just added a toggle. They just added a toggle in stage select, or character select actually, where you can just choose not to play with golden eggs. Like, yeah, that's a very good solution. Just give me the option. That's all I want. Just give me... I love just games that have tons of little options for the player to, just give them the choice of what they want to play, with. So you can just choose to like not, if you want to go for something more challenging, then like, yeah, you can just not use eggs. There was also an update where they updated a lot of the sprites for some of the characters, and some people were like, oh, I liked the old sprites. So they added a collectible item. And when you get it, you unlock the ability. They call it like character customization, but you just unlock the ability to switch to the old sprites. Like, oh, great, cool, neat. Just so many nice little... It feels like a developer who actually like listens to the player base and adds really nice features. I've never seen this many nice little quality of life, just nice little features and options and stuff added in like a game so consistently. So yeah, go play Vampire Survivors. Dear God, go do it. And it brings me actually to a game that I've been playing recently that's gotten popular in certain circles, let's say. That would be, speaking of Vampire Survivors, Holocure. So, I've probably mentioned it before. You probably just tell from certain references I've made. I'm a big fan of Hololive. If you don't know, Hololive is a virtual YouTuber agency, like streaming group, essentially. Shit, do I need to explain what VTubers are? I guess I could for people who really don't know. So VTubing or virtual YouTubing is basically doing like streaming or YouTube videos or whatever you want. But instead of using a like face cam and showing yourself on camera, you use a motion tracked avatar that like follows your movements and stuff. And it has kind of its own subculture of people who enjoy VTubing streamers. And yeah, there is an agency, or there's a company called Hololive. Technically, they're owned by a company named Cover. But Hololive is like basically an agency, and their idea is that they're a VTuber agency. So they pick up talents, and they kind of set them up with like, here's a VTuber like model, here's a bunch of support, you get like a manager, and they're kind of structured like an idol company. Their idea is that they're like a VTuber idol company or agency. So like a lot of them make music, they'll do like live performances and stuff. It's kind of like Japanese pop idols, except without the really toxic work environment. And it just kind of ends up being cute Japanese girls playing games. It's great. I love Hololive. So Holocure is a Hololive fan game that is basically a take on the Vampire Survivors formula. There's a bunch of like games popping up in this style now. I don't know what we're going to call them, but it's like its own little subgenre of games where you kill enemies and like level up and make builds, like buy items with your levels, and then you make builds and you try to survive or to a certain objective or something like that. Someone outside my room? Oh, I think we're watering outside my room. I think we're watering plants. Yada yada da. What was I talking about? Right, yeah, we're gonna need to come up with like a genre name for this, because there's a ton of like games spinning off of Vampire Survivors. I haven't played a lot of them yet, but it's neat. I'm glad it's a fun. I think it's a fun little subgenre to play around with. So Holocure specifically is, yeah, it's based off that, using Hololive idols, talents, whatever. So basically the idea is I think like the official full title is like Holocure Save the Fans or something. And first of all, Holocure is a reference to Pretty Cure, which is a very long running magical girl anime that takes a lot of like visual, the character designs take a lot of visual inspiration from like pop idols and stuff like that. So makes perfect sense because they fight monsters and stuff like that. So the idea behind this game is that this is kind of funny. Well, first of all, it opens with a cute little Mega Man style opening of like in the year 20XX, and it's like a quick background of like VTubers, and then oh no, there's fans who are too obsessed. They've been possessed by an evil entity, and you have to save them by, I don't know, slaying them basically with different playable Hololive characters. It makes some very... It's not like a pure clone of Vampire Survivors, and it does some things different in an interesting way. So first of all, I have to talk about the game, like the presentation. The graphics are wonderful. It's really cute, very charming, high-res pixel art. Really nice, like high frame rate animations. Very colorful. The music is fun. There aren't like very many tracks from what I remember. There's only like 2 or 3 tracks, or 4 maybe. And but it's like a cute like chiptune soundtrack. The sound design is really nice. Very like chunky, almost like 16-bit kind of sound effects. Presentation is like the game feels good. First of all, dealing damage and stuff feels good. I wish maybe there was like a little bit of okay. Let me get into some of the differences now. So one thing that Holocure does not have, that Vampire Survivors does have, is Holocure does not have any pushback on hit. So this is a thing that I think makes Vampire Survivors a little... In my opinion, it honestly makes Holocure harder than Vampire Survivors in some aspects. I haven't, like, fully developed out, like, bought all the upgrades or anything. I haven't quite gotten there, or I haven't even unlocked all the characters. I've just been trying to, like, struggling to consistently beat the single stage that it currently has. I've just been struggling to beat that consistently, basically. And then I'll kind of start like farming gold and stuff like that. Same system, same overall general system. You have playable characters. There's only one stage right now because it's in very early. I think it's only been out for like 20 days, something like that. Very early access or like demo period, beta period gameplay. So there's probably a bunch of stuff, maybe even like whole features. Actually, definitely whole features. Or gameplay like mechanics that just haven't been added yet. But as it is right now, in some ways I actually find it more challenging than Vampire Survivors because of the lack of knockback, which means that it's a lot harder to keep enemies off of you. Pretty much everything in I'm just going to call it VS. Pretty much everything in VS knocks enemies back on hit just a little bit, which goes a long way to keeping you alive in certain situations. In Holocure, you have to do a lot more like maneuvering. I think that the am I going crazy? Was there like a dodge mechanic that I forgot about? Hang on. Wait, game mechanics. Please tell me that I'm not. Please tell me that I'm not, like... Please tell me that I'm not forgetting, like, why do I feel like there was a dodge mechanic? Or, like, dash? I have to double-check the wiki now. I'm so scared. I guess they aren't. I guess there isn't. But, yeah, so the movement is a lot more key, and there's more... It does the same thing that VS does, where there are there's set waves of enemies, basically, and at certain points there are events that happen. So, like, so many minutes in, a bunch of, like, skeletons with shields that are really high, that are really high health, will come in like, a grid formation and just kind of fly across the screen. You kind of have to... Usually you don't have to, at that point, you don't have the damage to, like, deal with them. So you just kind of have to dodge and weave between them. There's, like, another phase where those, like, some really high health enemies start coming in at you in, like, circles, but they have little gaps in between a few of them. So you kind of have to escape through this horde of enemies, or else you're going to get killed. Because just like VS, you die pretty fast, even with defensive items, like, that give you shields and stuff. The game has more of a focus on, in terms of its, like, weapons and items, the game has more of a focus on, like, individual mechanics rather than interconnecting mechanics. So what I mean by that is that in VS, right, there's all of these different stats, and every weapon is affected by so many of the stats, right? So, like, the basic, like, the first character you get, he's got a whip, right? He lashes the whip out in front of him on a timer, every, like, 3 seconds or whatever. Well, obviously, the whip scales with damage, so it does more damage the more strength you have. It also scales with amount. So the amount if you have like an extra projectile upgrade, then you'll like do one whip thwack in front of you and one behind you. And then if you get another like amount increase, you'll get one in front of you, one behind you, and then another one in front of you every time it goes off. Up to like 4, I think. So two in front, 2 in the back. It also scales with size. So like the size of the whip, I guess projectile, whatever you want to call it, gets larger, and does it increase with duration? I'm not sure. But there's like all these things. There's several things that it scales with. So if you buy items that increase those stats, the whip will be affected by that. When you buy the holy water drops these, circles of fire on the ground, and that scales with a bunch of things. Damage, obviously, but also cooldown reduction. That's another thing. Everything scales with cooldown reduction. So, the holy water bottles will fall faster, or more of them will fall. Yeah, they'll fall at a faster rate, like around the The more cooldown reduction you have, the more duration you have, the fire pools will like stick around longer. The size stat, or area it's called in VS, the pools themselves will be longer. Are there any other ones that it scales with? Not really projectile speed until you get like the evolved form. Yeah, the evolved form of the holy water, it makes the pools move with as you move, so they move in the same direction you're going, which is affected by like projectile speed and stuff like that. So like investing in those will affect that. Holocure does not have quite the same level of like interaction. It more focuses on like items that have more unique. They're less like straight stat upgrades and more like their own unique kind of effects. So like there is some of that. Like there's an item. It's Noel's milk. There's a ton. The other appeal of the game is that it's packed with references to HoloLive stuff. It is just inundated with references to memes and running gags and just references to the individuals, like, idols, streams, and stuff like that. Just tons and tons of references all over the place. Every single item is pretty much some kind of reference. There's a very cute, it has kind of an evolution system, but it's where it's just with weapons. So like just weapons will, if you like max out 2 weapons that can be, they can fuse together, and it's called a collab. I was like, that's cute. They'll fuse into like a new like super weapon. That's like a combination of the 2 of them. And then all these things are cute little references. So like there's an item that's like Noel's milk, and it's called like the nightly milk, and it like increases like your pickup range for XP, and it makes just the area, like the size of your weapons, larger and stuff like that. So yeah, that's a pretty useful item I've found for a lot of different weapons. But then there's things like headphones, and the headphones, you have like a 15% chance, or it goes up the more you rank up, but you have like a percentage chance to dodge an attack when you get hit. So it'll just, you'll dodge out of it and take no damage. And if you do, it'll release like a shockwave that blows opponents away. Like that doesn't, as far as I'm aware, doesn't really interact with any other stats, unless, I have the wiki up, because of course there is a wiki. Let's see, weapons. Let's just randomly pick like fucking they don't have the items. They don't have the items. Items, there it is. Okay. Let's see. Let's find the headphones. Does it say if they have Oh, it's always. Does not appear to have a cooldown period. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that isn't really known about the game yet. That just has to be observed. Like it doesn't seem to be related to any other kind of thing or other stat. Another item, injection type Asakoko. So the injection type Asakoko is you lose 5% HP every second. You can't die from it. You'll go down to 1 HP. But you will gain 30% damage. So, like, doesn't really have an interaction with the stat, but the effect itself is kind of an interesting trade-off. So, and then you can kind of like build things around. So whereas like in Vampire Survivors, it's like there's items that might not necessarily upgrade weapons, like evolve weapons directly, but they can be really good with those weapons, right? So for instance, the Empty Tome, which gives cooldown reduction, is good with everything. You get it in like every build, even though it only evolves the magic wand. It seems like, so like for instance here they have on the wiki we got some hot tips, we got some strategy tips. Most effective on characters who can offset the HP loss via high healing capability. For instance, like Fauna, Iris, and there's an item that called the Full Meal that like increases how much you heal. There's some other items that will also like regenerate your health, which can kind of counteract that. So it's kind of like there's not a ton of like interaction between like direct interaction between the items with like the stat system, but there is like the functional the functions interact more than the stats do, if that makes sense, which I think is more interesting. Because I feel like in VS, there's just kind of like, there's at least, I don't think it's not like a solved game, I wouldn't call it that, but there are just like you kind of figure out like, okay, this is a generally strong build, right? Like, if you just want to win in VS, right? If you just want to clear the stage, Bibles, the Bibles, Holy Water, some kind of damage. If you evolve like 2 of them, some other damage thing. If you evolve like at least 2 of them, you can just win like every stage pretty much. It's really hard to lose if you've got those and like some leveled up weapons and stuff like that. It's really hard to lose. So you just kind of like figure that out. And I'm sure there's stuff in this game that's also pretty powerful, but it's definitely designed in a different way that might make those interactions a little more subtle, because you're more just thinking like what functionally synergizes with this, rather than this is just good because it makes my cooldown less, or it makes the area bigger. Not against Vampire Survivors. That's just the way that game is like kind of designed and balanced, and that's fun. That is fun. Wait, what else did I want to talk about? So there's only one like stage at the moment. There isn't like a ton to talk about. There's a pretty good number of items and weapons and stuff. Actually, a surprising number of both of those. Decent amount of stuff to unlock. It has a cute little... I keep calling this game cute because it is. But there is a cute little system for unlocking characters. It's a gacha. It's a gacha game where you spend your coins to roll a gacha on a banner for whichever group or like generation you're pulling from. So right now it's only the Hololive English generations 1 and 2. And Iris is included in Gen 2. Because, I don't know, she's like a weird half-generation thing. But, so, you have to, like... You start out with the entire first gen unlocked, and then you have to pull on the second gen banner to get the chance to unlock one of them. And then if you get a duplicate, then you get, I think, a permanent like level up like stat increase for that character, if you already have them. So there is like a decent amount of stuff to collect and unlock and check out. There's only one stage at the moment because, again, it is very early access, and I can imagine that with the just like the level of the graphics and like the pixel art and the quality of the pixel art and all that, probably takes a while to like, you know, design all the enemies, design all the animations and stuff like that, and to, you know, do the art for a stage, the tile sets. So for being like the first version of the game, pretty good. I'm sure there's some bugs and stuff. Oh, I want to mention, I should talk about the way that the like characters work. So one difference from it has from VS is that in VS there are, sort of mention it, but there's like a set of items or set of weapons in VS, and every character, their starting weapon is gonna be one of those. I think there are a couple who have like ones that are unique to them, but they're kind of the outliers. For the most part, it's like every weapon has a corresponding character who has that as their starting weapon. In Holocure, every character has a unique starting weapon that's just theirs. It's just theirs, and then they, you know, obviously branch out when they level up and stuff into different weapons that everyone can access, but their weapon is unique to them. And every character has 3 unique skills that they'll sometimes be presented with at the level up shop. And those skills can be leveled up to 3, and the skills are super important to the character. Like, the skills are very strong. Gura has a really good one that's like a tide pool, or it's a whirlpool, sorry. It's like a whirlpool that sucks enemies in, and it will spawn around the screen and then suck enemies in slowly, which is really useful for survivability because, again, this game has no like natural knockback, or like no like universal general knockback on hit. And every character has a special skill that is also unique to them. Like Ame stops time, and Ina makes a bunch of tentacles in a big like fucking whirling death slap thing around her. Fauna grows a big tree where she heals and becomes invulnerable for a few seconds. It's stuff like that. So it's like, yeah, when you talk about like a lot more like unique, like individuality amongst the characters, it's kind of, that's how it's kind of what it's going more for, rather than just like, here is like a kind of build that you're going to start out with, like in VS. Like, oh, if I want a certain build, I'll start out with like maybe a certain character, because they're going to lean into that, and it's, you know, I'm going to get a head start by already starting with that item or something like that. Yeah, it's, do I have anything else to really say? It's free. I should have mentioned that at the start. It is 100% free. I don't think they would, they wouldn't be able to charge money for it, even if they wanted to, because it's a fan game, and it's using like their Cover Corporation's characters and stuff like that, and they have like, Cover has they have like a guidelines for fan works, and I think even on like the itch.io page they say like, hey, we're fully compliant with the fanworks guidelines. So it's all free, and for being free, the amount of like effort put into it is really quite outstanding. Do they accept donations? Free unofficial fan game. I'm curious if they have donations. Developed by KU or KU. I don't see anything. Yeah, so it's literally just a pretty cool game with a lot of effort put into it that's in a very early stage. I would recommend checking it out. If you like Hololive or you like Vampire Survivors type games, because this one has a pretty high production value. And there's a bunch of stuff that they are adding. They already have, like, they're going to add Hololive Gamers Generation and JP Gen 0. So, like, I'm assuming their goal is to get every single Hololive member, which is going to be a monumental task. But, yeah, it's cool. Check it out. And before my throat completely burns out, I want to talk about one more game. We've I guess completed a sort of arc of Warhammer 40k games, and that is the arc of games that you progressively need to, let's see, 40k games that you don't need to know that much about 40k to enjoy. Yeah. That's what I'll call it. Excuse me. And we've been on an upward trajectory where I'd say, Space Marine, it's a fun game, but a lot of the enjoyment that I got out of it was, excuse me, what I got out of it was just in, like, the atmosphere and being able to walk around in these super cool Warhammer environments, which I don't know if that would have the same appeal to someone who isn't into the franchise. And then you had Dawn of War, which is a really, really good RTS with basically a Warhammer skin and over it, and units themed based around Warhammer factions. We're like, yeah, you can enjoy Dawn of War and enjoy the gameplay and kind of figure out what's going on and what the universe is and all that. And then we get to today's topic, Warhammer 40k Mechanicus. This game came out in 2018 and is one of, if not the highest rated Warhammer games. Space Marine is like a decent game that I think improves a lot if you like the franchise. Dawn of War is a really good game that also improves if you like the franchise. Mechanicus is a game that you can enjoy a lot without knowing anything about Warhammer 40k. And I feel that pretty confidently because the game is just straight up really good. And it has, it's just basically just telling a Warhammer story, but without so much context needed. So, how should I guess I'll begin with the basic setup of the plot. So basically, Warhammer 40k Mechanicus is about the Adeptus Mechanicus. Wow, shocker. So, if you don't know, the Mechanicus are the tech priests. They are a bunch of technology-worshipping weirdos who replace as much of their bodies as possible with machinery, and they live on Mars in like a little cult, and they make all the stuff for the Imperium of Man. They are the primary like engineers and developers of machinery. They're not like supposed to make new things because that's like heretical, but they just like quote unquote find old things from mankind's lost era of technological prosperity and then figure out how to get them, develop them and manufacture them and get them working again, quote unquote. Because yeah, the tech priests have never ever developed anything new. Never ever. The Primaris Marines were just sitting there. Just, oh my god, there's just like a fucking million Marines that are like upgraded from the original Marines. They're just here. Wow, we just found them on this fucking lab we have that we've always known about. We've always known about it, guys. So like, I love the tech priests. They're kind of jostling for one of my favorite just lore factions in 40k. They're really fun because they're weird and goofy, and they're so into their tech religion. Their god is called the Omnisaya, and the only reason they serve the Empire is because they believe that the Emperor is like the living embodiment of the Omnisaya, but actually, the Emperor, like thousands of years ago, actually like set up this scenario like for them. Fuck it, it's a bunch of Warhammer lore. Basically, the Emperor of Mankind, the God Emperor, he like found this like old, this like star god called the Void Dragon, which was like living technology, and he like wrestled it into submission and buried it in a tomb under Mars, and then like its energy seeped up and it affected the people living there, and over like millennia they just became super into technology and it became their whole religion. And then he shows up after like no contact with them for thousands and thousands, like millennia literally, and he's like uses his psychic powers to make their machines turn off, and they're like, you must be the living embodiment of the Omnisaya, the machine god. And he's like, yep, that's me. You want to make tanks for me now? And they're like, well, of course, a living Omnisaya. He's like, wink, wink. Yeah, I am. It's fucking silly. So, the tech priests, generally, what's cool about it is that, this game in particular, is that the tech priests do not tend to get their own stories. There's a handful of books about them. Like 2, but they tend to be more like supporting characters because they play mainly a supportive role in the setting. Like, they can fight, they do have like infantry units, and of course they make all the war machines for the Empire, but they're generally not like, they're not the front line. They might assist sometimes, but they're not the main force. You got the guardsmen and the space marines are generally going to be taking up the Grey Knights or any one of the other fucking like 500 super specialized task forces that the Empire has. They're usually taking like the main fight. The tech priests are sometimes there to support, and they're also like so weird. And part of their charm is that they're so weird and like unrelatable. And they like talk in like funny like machine references, and they're just obsessed with technology. Like, they're entertaining, but they're kind of like, most authors don't usually tie stories around them because it's kind of like they're not very relatable in like a human way. I don't think you need a character to be relatable, quote unquote, to be a good protagonist, but it's easier if you can kind of relate to a character to make their story a little interesting. With tech priests, it's more just like, ooh, we want this fucking, ooh, there's a microwave, we need to salvage this from the planet. It's like, maybe it could work for like a comedy story, but yeah, generally don't get a ton of, they tend to just be, supporting other characters, or they're just a fact of the setting, so that's kind of how they come into play. So it's cool to have an entire game based around the Mechanicus. So the basic setup is that they get a distress call from this tech priest who is investigating this world. They go and find it out. They end up traveling through a warp storm, which means that when they come out the other side, basically all their communications are shut off. They cannot contact other parts of the Empire for help. They pretty much just got to go down and see what's going on. So they go down and they find out that the planet is a Necron tomb world. The Necrons are basically like, imagine like an entire faction of Terminators, but they're like ancient Egypt themed. So they're all like skeleton mummy looking robots they're all metal and mechanical and excuse me, like black and silver and gold and those kinds of things, those kinds of colors, and green as like a general just accent, like green energy and stuff like that. And their higher up units have like pharaoh headdresses, and they've got like hieroglyphs, and their groups are called like dynasties, and they travel around in like giant black pyramids. They have like not cherubs, scarabs that like crawl around and heal them. And they're like mummies, right? So they have all these like protocols, essentially, is what they're called, which are like just kind of like their special abilities in the actual Warhammer game, but in lore, it's like the protocols are just like, yeah, just abilities that they have in the lore. For instance, like the reanimation protocol. So like they will, in like the tabletop game of Warhammer, they can like reanimate after you've killed them. Like you can roll to reanimate. So the Necrons were like, they sealed themselves away for like millennia, and then they actually came back into the lore. They actually were like kind of on ice for a while. They were supposed to just be like chaos cyborgs. I think that was like what their models were originally called. And then Games Workshop like rebooted them essentially. And they said, oh, they were just sequestered away deep underground, inactive on what they called tomb worlds. And then guess what? A tech priest was like, ooh, what's this? And fucking hit a button. And then a tomb world woke up, and it set off other tomb worlds to go off, or to start waking up. And now the Necrons are a force in the galaxy. Great job, tech priests. That's kind of the fun part about tech priests, is sometimes their curiosity will also get the better of them. It's also how this game opens. So you go down, you find out, like, oh, what's this? And then you press a button and a fucking, like, Necron leader unit wakes up. And so, the basic idea is that they're basically, it's, when you talk about, their curiosity getting the better of them, it's kind of like the game is based around balancing. Your goals are, this planet is going to wake up and it's going to be bad. So you got to like nuke this shit from orbit. But before you do that, we should like get as much stuff as we can, right? Like that would be kind of nice if we could just get a bunch of info. So the kind of hub area is like the ship floating in orbit. And there's all of these archmagoses or archmaguses, whatever you want to call them. The like leaders on the ship, and they all kind of have different ideas about how they should go about it. Like there's one guy who's really into just like, oh my god, just study everything, take everything, don't care about what lives you put at risk. There's another guy who's like, no, we need to destroy all the Xenos technology. It's heretical. And then there's like one lady who's like really into, she just wants as many troops to make it out as possible. So, and they're the ones who gives you missions. So you go down, you kind of unlock and discover different parts of the Tomb World, and then you have different missions in those different parts. So in terms of the actual gameplay, well, I guess I should talk about the hub world stuff. So you basically have like, no, actually, I'll talk about the missions and stuff. So you go down on missions, and it's like you have an objective for the mission. The simplest way that I can describe it is that there's kind of two segments to each mission, the exploration part and the combat part. The exploration part is Darkest Dungeon, and the combat part is XCOM. Now, that might be interesting to you if you like either of those games, but here's a nice little cherry on top, is that it's like those two kind of games combined, but with some of the more stressful elements taken out. Some key stressful elements taken out, which might be very appealing to you. For instance, if you like XCOM, the combat sections in Mechanicus has no RNG. That's like sort of not true. There's no like hit percentage. There's no like hit rate. If an enemy is within your range and you choose to like attack them, you will attack them. You will shoot them or do a melee slash. The only RNG is how much damage you do. So that's based off of like the unit's level, what weapon they're using. There's like a critical hit chance that each weapon has. There's bonuses that affect those things, and then each enemy also has they can have either physical or an energy shields, which will reduce the maximum damage, for instance. So like if you have if you can deal like 3 to 5 damage to an enemy, but like with like an energy shot from your laser pistol, your laser gun, you I don't think it's a laser gun. It's something else. It's your ranged. It's your gun. It's your plasma gun. Right. So it's an energy-based weapon. If it does like 3 to 5 damage, if the enemy has like 2 energy shield, they'll basically knock 2 off of the maximum damage you can deal to them. So you'll probably only deal like 3 damage. If it would only deal like 2 damage and the opponent has like 2 energy shield, they won't take any damage from it. So that's the most amount of variance, and it's just enough that it adds some of that tension of RNG, but without the frustration of being right in front of an opponent or an enemy and with like a 95% chance to hit and you still miss. That does not happen in this game. So it's much I'd say maybe the tactics might feel more rewarding. I don't know. It depends on how you feel about it. But I think a lot of people would look at that as being like a pretty nice feature. Or lack of a feature, if you want to. Depending on how you look at it. Let's see. I guess I'll break down the mission structure. So yeah, the first part, when I say Darkest Dungeon, it's basically you're given a little holographic map, and then you order your troops around which rooms to go. So there's like an objective room where the combat section will be. But before that, you will be traveling between rooms, and in each room, there tends to be usually some kind of event that might pop up. So similar to Darkest Dungeon, where you're kind of picking the order that you go through the rooms in. Unlike Darkest Dungeon, so there is a ticking clock element to the game, much like in XCOM. In Darkest Dungeon, within like the dungeons, that was the sanity effects and your light level, and you had to replenish your light level, and there's this whole resource management thing with the torches and all that of keeping your light level up. In this game, the ticking clock element is that the longer you take, the higher the awakening level gets. So it's basically kind of like it's sort of like a clock, basically. And then when you reach like a full rotation, the awakening level goes up 1. And that means that in the combat section, enemies they'll have more bonuses, basically. It'll make the combat section harder for yourself. So you'll be presented, you'll go to like a room with an event. And you'll be presented with, for instance, like, here is I'm just trying to pick one out of a hat of the ones that I've encountered so far. It's like, here is a Necron tablet or something, a stone tablet with markings on it, and now then all the other Archmaguses will argue about like what you should do with it, and you'll get like 3 options, and it'll be like, you can study it, you can destroy it, or you can ignore it. So Destroying it will net you some, like, the main currency of the game is like Blackstone. Will net you some Blackstone, maybe. Studying it might give you cognition points, which is a resource that you can use to do certain things in the combat sections. And then ignoring it will get you out faster. But also, like, studying it or destroying it will increase the... It sort of depends depending on the event, but it can increase the awakening level, or it can increase like the enemy's initiative in combat. So like who strikes first in combat and stuff like that, or turn order mainly. So you kind of have to make these choices where you can kind of figure out, once you've gone through enough of them, approximately like what you'll gain from each one. Some of them are still like, okay, like you choose to do that and one of your units takes damage. Like, okay, well, that's not great. There is a bit of like, you're kind of testing the waters and seeing what happens, but and kind of going with your gut on what to do. And then after you've kind of gone through the mission, through the system of rooms, basically, you can choose to go to as many or as few as you'd like, depending on, how much you want to kind of tempt fate. It's a balancing act of like how much reward do you want to get versus how comfortable or how confident are you that you'll be able to make it through the combat section. Because I have already lost a combat section. I don't have a ton of hours in the game right now. So I haven't experienced a whole lot of it, but basically, yeah, that's how it works. I don't imagine the gameplay is going to change. So I've got like I've got about 3 hours in it, or 4 hours. Sorry, I've got about 4 hours, which might seem like not a lot, but honestly, at the pace that it's going, I might already be like a quarter of the way through the game, depending on how bad I do. So this is the overall ticking clock thing. So there's a ticking clock element within the missions, which is the awakening level. But then when you finish the missions, you tally up your score of like one nice thing is that if a unit dies, if a character dies in the combat section, you don't lose them. You lose them for the rest of the combat section, but they get revived when you're done. But it costs you Blackstone, so it costs you your resource to revive them and to heal them. Basically, how much health they're missing when you're done is it costs money. It's like 10 Blackstone per like HP. Excuse me. And characters have maybe like 10 HP max. At least to the point I'm at. So like you go through like how much you lost from losing units or having your units damaged. You'll go through how much you gained via enemies you killed and events you went through, and then you'll get like a general reward for completing the mission, plus like whatever other rewards like upgrades and new unit types and stuff like that, or weapons and augmentations for your units. Because there's a whole customization thing with equipping them with things. There's a big skill tree system actually with like 5 different skill lines that you can spec into like multiple ones of, and each one is sort of like a different. There's like a combat one. There's like a leadership one that'll like buff your other units. There's one that's produces resources for you in combat. There's a bunch of different ones. Like a pretty good variety of like you can build different units, your different little like infantry units for different purposes and stuff like that. There's like active items that you can equip. There's passive items you can equip, and they might have like costs for the main like resource in the combat segments is called. It's called cognition points, which they refer to as CP. So, I hate when devs do that. I really gotta... Yeah, I'm stocking up on CP right now. Fuck. So like that's used for things like it uses, the XCOM style of you get a movement for free, and then if you want to move further, like in a further range, then you have to spend 1 CP to do that. There's weapons that use it. There's active abilities that use it. So it's a very valuable resource. You want to be stocking up on it. You can harvest it from afar with your little servo skull, which is, I found out kind of recently, which is useful. Yeah, I don't know. It's a very solid, like, fun, basic combat system, and then the stuff from the combat lets you upgrade your units in between missions. You find new items to equip to your units. You even get to customize the color scheme of your characters. So I made a little. It starts out with the basic, or the kind of standard tech priest color scheme is like they wear these like big red and yellow robes, and they've got all these mechanical silvery parts. I opted for, so it's like the default. I opted for, you can make a custom one too. They have like some presets and some custom one, and you can make a custom one. I made a nice like Cellarcast CGA magenta and cyan, which I think looks pretty neat. And yeah, there's a whole, oh yeah, so like when you talk about, one of the neat things about this game is that it is, if you're interested in 40K, so like not only is the, oh I didn't, let me finish talking about the ticking clock element, then I'll talk about the lore. So when you finish a mission, get everything tallied up, the awakening level that you finished with, because it can also go up during the combat sections too. I think every turn it goes up by like 1 notch. The awakening level that you finish the mission with then gets added to the total like awakening level of the planet. So if you finish with like awakening level 5, you will 5% will be added onto that. So you're trying to kind of maximize your rewards before it hits 100. And then you really don't want that awakening level to go up during missions, because every level it can do things like increase the amount of enemies that will spawn in every turn. So like it could, baseline it'll be like you have to take out 2 enemies, but if the level is higher, like the first one will be like more Necron, like level 2 is like more Necrons spawn in during battle. So like Necrons will awaken out of these tombs on the battlefield. And then you have to kill those. It's more that you have to take care of. One of them is Necrons reawaken faster because they resurrect faster, because the resurrection protocol is integrated into this game, where once you kill a Necron, they aren't taken care of unless if you crit them. Actually, this is actually a Darkest Dungeon thing, now that I think of it. Darkest Dungeon has that system that they added in, where when you kill an enemy, it'll leave behind a corpse, but if you kill them with a crit, it'll like, they won't leave a corpse behind. This game does the same thing, where Necrons, if you reduce their health to 0, they will deactivate, but I think at the start it's like in 3 turns, they will revive with like half their health back until you hit them again. You only need to hit them one more time. There's no like amount of damage that they need to take. Just hit them one more time, and then they'll disappear for good. If you kill them with a crit, then they get completely obliterated. So like, yeah, it's actually a very Darkest Dungeon type thing. So just more stuff for you to deal with. I guess I talk about the lore now. So, when I say lore, what I mainly mean is just that everything in the game is... what's nice about it is that I think you genuinely like don't need to know anything about 40K to actually enjoy this game because the gameplay itself is just really solid. If you like games like Darkest Dungeon, if you like XCOM specifically, because of things like that taking clock element, like the combat, especially if you don't like the RNG in XCOM, you might really enjoy Mechanicus because it's a lot more. I wouldn't say it's less strategic at all. It's just that certain annoying things are left out, but like positioning, the way that you spend your very limited resources, and like kind of keep up resources by refilling on your cognition points from like there's little pillars that you can refill them from and stuff like that. There's like troops. Every new turn you can spawn in what's called a troop, which is just kind of like a soldier type that has like a little melee swing where you unlock more kinds of troops, but that's the default one. And every time it takes damage, you gain a cognition point. So you can kind of like spawn them in and like body block with them, and that'll make your life easier because you can move more and you can use certain weapons that cost cognition points. There's plenty of strategy. And it's really satisfying. It's really satisfying to like pull off like a really successful combat encounter. If that sounds interesting, you can totally check it out, and the Warhammer lore will not really be a barrier of entry, I think, at all. You can pretty much just go, okay, I guess that's a thing. You can almost view it as like something that's not even. It doesn't rely on you to know anything about the lore to actually like understand what's going on. It gives you a pretty obvious setup where you can just say, oh, okay, there's some tech priests. These guys are tech priests, I guess. They're very religious and very techy, and they wake up some robots. It's not hard to get into, but everything that is there is 100% lore accurate. There's like a bunch of little references to, what am I talking about? Brain shorting. Like actual equipment that the Mechanicus use, unit types that they have, terminology. So it is actually like, I think it fulfills multiple kinds of audiences, and if you're curious about learning more about the lore, it's a perfectly fine jumping on point because it's totally enjoyable without knowing anything, and you could kind of like get the gist of what's going on from that. And it's also like, there's no big storyline that it's telling. It's not like the Horus Heresy or some shit like that, or even like, Space Marine it's sort of hard to like the Chaos Marines just show up in that game, and it's like, I guess I just have to know what those are? I don't know what those are. I guess I just have to know? Nothing really of that sort in this. It's very easy to jump into. So yeah, I would recommend it. It's really good, and it's made by an indie studio too. Very impressive. The soundtrack is fantastic. Soundtrack is so good. It's like it's exactly what I would want the tech priests to sound like, music-wise. They have it's like this combination of like choir organ music, like very gothic cathedral type stuff, and humming and chanting, but with then like with this electronic kind of grimy thing kind of fused in there, and just really nice, like atmospheric wise, really gorgeous tracks, to be honest. Excuse me. Oh, which one was the one I was listening to? The battle theme is really good. I don't know if there's multiple. I can't remember if there's multiple battle themes, but yeah, I'd check that out too. Just for like background music, honestly. I really highly recommend Mechanicus. I've heard that it gets a lot easier towards the end of the game, but like, it's fine with me. It's really cool. Big ups, big recommendation. And with that, I am pretty much done. My throat's tired. I want to drink something to heal it up a bit. Thank you for listening. If you've been listening this far, thank you for being willing to stick around and listen to me ramble. If you have a question, be sure to leave it in the comments below, and I will definitely get to it next time, but please leave it in the form of a question because I don't want to just read your thoughts out loud. I'll be back next week with more stuff to talk about. There'll be a new video next week. Thank you for the support on the videos. I have a Patreon, yada yada. Pretty sure that's it. Goodbye.